Team 14 of 52 teams of 8 competitive rival wisdoms that help make humanity wiser and kinder with antique quotes that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate and entertain generations for centuries. Team Quote 14.1. Bravery never goes out of fashion. William Thackeray 1811 to 1863. This timeless quote from William Thackeray, the English novelist known for Vanity Fair, makes a clever play on the concept of fashion to emphasize the enduring value of courage. As someone who satirized society's obsession with social status and trends, Thackeray pointedly suggests that while fashions come and go, bravery remains eternally valuable. What makes this observation particularly effective is how it contrasts the ephemeral nature of fashion with the timeless quality of courage. By using the language of fashion, a world of constant change, to describe bravery's permanence, Thackeray highlights how true courage transcends the shifting trends of any particular era. There's also a subtle critique here of society's tendency to chase passing fads. While other qualities might rise and fall in social estimation, Thackeray suggests that bravery maintains its worth regardless of current social attitudes or cultural shifts. The simplicity of the statement belies its depth. It implies that bravery is not just consistently valuable, but consistently necessary. Each era brings its own challenges requiring courage to face them. This message remains strikingly relevant today, reminding us that while our world constantly changes and evolves, the fundamental human quality of courage, whether moral, physical, or intellectual, never loses its importance or worth. Team Quote 14.2. Don't let schooling interfere with your education. Mark Twain 1835 to 1910. This quintessential Mark Twain quote reflects his witty and irreverent approach to conventional wisdom. As someone who largely educated himself through reading and real-world experience, Twain understood the distinction between formal schooling and genuine learning. What makes this observation particularly clever is how it challenges the common assumption that schooling and education are synonymous. Twain suggests that formal education might actually get in the way of deeper, more meaningful learning experiences. This aligns with his own life experience. He left school at age 12, but became one of America's most educated and insightful writers through self-directed learning. There's also a deeper critique here of rigid institutional learning. Twain implies that true education is broader than classroom instruction. It encompasses life experiences, independent thinking, and personal discovery. The quote encourages questioning whether following prescribed educational paths might sometimes prevent us from pursuing more valuable learning opportunities. The paradox in the statement, that something designed to educate might interfere with education, is classic Twain. It's both humorous and thought-provoking, forcing us to examine our assumptions about learning and knowledge acquisition. This insight remains remarkably relevant today, particularly in discussions about alternative education paths, self-directed learning, and the value of real-world experience versus formal credentials. It reminds us that true education extends far beyond classroom walls. Team Quote 14.3. Remorse, the fatal egg that pleasure laid. William Cowper 1731 to 1800. This powerful metaphor from William Cowper, the English poet and hymn writer, captures the often inevitable relationship between pleasure and regret. As someone who struggled with depression throughout his life, Cowper had a deep understanding of how momentary pleasures could lead to lasting remorse. What makes this observation particularly striking is the biological metaphor. Remorse isn't just a consequence of pleasure, but is hatched from it, like an egg that contains its future form. The word fatal suggests that this relationship is both inevitable and destructive. The brevity and poetic structure of the quote belies its psychological depth. It suggests that remorse isn't just something that follows pleasure, but is inherently contained within it from the beginning, just as an egg contains all the genetic material for what it will become. There's also a subtle commentary on time here. While pleasure is often immediate, Cowper suggests that, like an egg, remorse takes time to develop and reveal itself. By the time we recognize it, it's too late to undo its effects. This insight remains relevant today in understanding the psychology of decision-making and immediate versus long-term consequences. It reminds us that momentary pleasures might carry within them the seeds of future regret, calling for careful consideration of our choices. Team quote 14.4. The discipline of desire is the background of character. John Locke 1632–1704. This profound quote from John Locke, the influential English philosopher, captures a fundamental truth about character formation. As someone who wrote extensively about human understanding and education, Locke recognized that mastery over one's desires is essential to developing strong character. What makes this observation particularly insightful is the use of the word background, suggesting that controlling desire isn't just one aspect of character, but the foundation upon which all other aspects of character are built. The term, discipline, is also significant, implying that this control isn't natural or automatic, but requires conscious, sustained effort. There's a deep connection here to Locke's broader philosophical ideas about human nature and rational self-governance. He suggests that what truly defines us isn't our desires themselves, but rather our ability to regulate and direct them through reason and discipline. The metaphor of background also suggests something permanent and ever-present, like a canvas behind a painting. This implies that the discipline of desire isn't a one-time achievement, but a continuous practice that supports all other aspects of character development. This insight remains remarkably relevant today, particularly in a consumer culture that often encourages immediate gratification. It reminds us that strong character isn't built on following our desires, but on developing the capacity to govern them wisely. Team quote 14.5. None so deaf as those that will not hear. None so blind as those that will not see. Matthew Henry 1662–1714. This quote from Matthew Henry, the English nonconformist minister and biblical commentator, powerfully describes willful ignorance. As a religious scholar who dedicated his life to interpretation and understanding, Henry recognized that the greatest barriers to knowledge are often self-imposed. What makes this observation particularly striking is its identification of choice in ignorance. By using will not, rather than cannot, Henry suggests that the most profound form of deafness and blindness is voluntary, people choosing not to hear or see what they'd rather ignore. The parallel structure reinforces the universality of this human tendency, whether it's through refusing to listen to opposing viewpoints, deaf, or declining to acknowledge uncomfortable truths, blind. People often actively participate in their own ignorance. There's also a subtle distinction between physical and moral/intellectual disabilities here. While actual deafness and blindness are not matters of choice, Henry suggests that their metaphorical counterparts, the refusal to understand or acknowledge truth, are conscious decisions. This insight remains remarkably relevant today, particularly in an era of information bubbles and confirmation bias. It reminds us that the biggest obstacle to understanding often isn't a lack of available information, but rather our own unwillingness to engage with ideas or truths that challenge our existing beliefs. Team quote 14.6. Modesty is the only sure bait when you angle for praise. Lord Chesterfield 1694–1773. This witty quote from Lord Chesterfield, the British statesman and writer known for his letters of advice to his son, offers a shrewd observation about human nature. As someone deeply versed in the ways of society and reputation, Chesterfield understood the paradoxical relationship between modesty and praise. What makes this observation particularly clever is the fishing metaphor, bait and angle, suggesting that gaining praise is like catching fish. It requires the right technique in bait. The irony is that by presenting oneself modestly, one is more likely to catch the praise of others than by openly seeking it. There's a subtle complexity in the word sure, implying that while there might be other ways to gain praise, modesty is the most reliable method. This aligns with Chesterfield's broader teachings about social grace and proper conduct in society. The quote also contains practical wisdom about human psychology. People tend to resist praising those who actively seek acclaim, while being more inclined to commend those who appear humble about their achievements. This insight remains remarkably relevant today, particularly in an era of social media and self-promotion. It reminds us that sometimes the most effective way to gain recognition is not to demand it, but to let one's merits speak for themselves while maintaining a modest demeanor. Team quote 14.7. The first man gets the oyster, the second man gets the shell. Andrew Carnegie, 1835–1919. This competitive quote from Andrew Carnegie, the industrial magnate who built one of America's largest fortunes, reflects his beliefs about business success and first-mover advantage. As someone who dominated the American steel industry by being an early innovator, Carnegie understood firsthand the benefits of being first to market. What makes this observation particularly powerful is the oyster metaphor. It perfectly captures the stark difference between being first versus second in business opportunities. The first person gets the valuable meat of the oyster, the profit, the market share, the innovation advantage, while latecomers are left with just the empty shell. The simplicity of the metaphor belies its depth. Like many of Carnegie's insights, it's grounded in practical experience rather than abstract theory. Having started as a poor immigrant and becoming one of the wealthiest people in the world, he understood how timing and initiative could make the difference between massive success and mere leftovers. There's also a broader application beyond business. The quote speaks to the general advantage of being proactive rather than reactive in any endeavor, whether in business, education, or personal opportunities. It suggests that waiting too long often means missing out on the real value. This message remains strikingly relevant today, particularly in fast-moving fields like technology and entrepreneurship, where being first to market can still mean the difference between major success and playing catch-up. Team quote 14.8. Insults are the arguments employed by those who are in the wrong. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1712–1778. This insightful quote from Rousseau, the influential philosopher of the Enlightenment, reveals a deep understanding of human behavior and disagreements. As someone who engaged in many philosophical debates and faced considerable criticism for his ideas, Rousseau recognized how people often resort to personal attacks when their arguments lack substance. What makes this observation particularly powerful is how it frames insults not just as bad behavior, but as an indirect admission of being wrong. The word employed is especially telling. It suggests that insults are tools deliberately used to deflect from the weakness of one's position. There's also a practical wisdom here about how to interpret personal attacks in an argument. Rousseau suggests that when someone shifts from addressing the substance of a disagreement to launching personal insults, it's often a signal that they can't defend their position on its merits. The quote contains an implicit guide for constructive discourse, suggesting that valid arguments don't need to rely on personal attacks. This aligns with Rousseau's broader philosophical emphasis on rational discourse and the social contract. This insight remains strikingly relevant today, particularly in an era of social media debates and political discourse, where ad hominem attacks often substitute for reasoned argument. It reminds us that resorting to insults in a disagreement may reveal more about the weakness of one's position than the character of one's opponent. And if you'd like to help raise school test scores and self-confidence, you can give your kids free Easy Extra Advantage math, spelling and reading workbooks you can download for free at stop2think.com or buy at educationstopshate.com. Free Easy Math Wisdom workbooks with octo-repetition to grow math self-confidence. You'll get plenty of repetitive practice of age ranges and averages of our 52 teams of 8 quote authors. Free Easy Alpha cipher-coded puzzles teach letters, numbers, and phrases using antique wisdoms that encourage and educate. Can you decode this cipher quote of encouragement using either our learning to spell or just for fun instructions? And since time is money, practice reading faster with 52 teams of antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries. We offer printed versions and timed videos with background music. Sign up for free weekly emails of 52 teams of antique rival wisdom workbooks with easy math, spelling, and reading practice. And if you'd like to get paid for sharing our wearable wisdoms, keep this in mind. Everyone I know wears a shirt, and most of us change them daily, so change your shirt and change the world. Social equalities are blatantly subliminal antique positive wisdoms repetitively shared without saying a word. This applies to all our wearable shareable wisdoms, like pretty witty baby onesies and baby teas that you and others will see and read multiple times a day. The same is true with pretty witty kids, but they'll also share these wisdoms with anyone that can read at daycare or school. Youthful truths let your kids gain confidence, sharing antique wisdoms with their friends. Imagine them sharing words of wisdom with classmates and teachers. Therefore I think teas I wear is a super easy way to share words of wisdom that have passed the test of time. Our social equalities help make us all wiser and kinder with blatantly subliminal messages, promoting a more fair and equal opportunity society for all. And don't forget our giftwisdoms.com for birthdays and holidays that makes it easy to share the wisdom with clothing, coffee mugs and magnets. So do the future a favor by encouraging, educating and entertaining with words of wisdom that have passed the test of time to make us all wiser and kinder. With wearable wisdoms to fit babies, kids and adults, you can clothe a whole family, city or state. Join the 52 of 8 today at 52of8.com.